It is October, which means it is officially Preptober, the month of October where we prepare to write a novel in a month for National Novel Writing Month, which is, of course, November. So, in honor of Preptober, we are going to outline a novel together. That's right, we are going to sit down together and create a simple novel outline. In this video, we're going to be going over how I personally create simple outlines for my books, and we do that doing the Save the Cat method with story beats. So if you want to outline a novel with me, aka as we go through this video, then make sure to stay tuned, and let's get ready to write an entire novel in a month. Hello everyone, my name is Mandi Lynn. I'm an author, book cover designer, and the creator of the Book Launch Planner series, and I make weekly videos on the business of being an author. So if that sounds good to you, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification icon so you never miss a new upload. I just wanted to take a quick pause on the video to thank today's sponsor, ClickUp. So you guys all know I love any and all things that are related to productivity and organization, which means ClickUp is a brand new tool that I cannot wait to tell you guys about. So think of ClickUp as your digital organization tool when it comes to basically anything, but the most specific example I can give you guys is using it as a way of making sure you check off all the boxes when it comes to publishing your novel. So if you guys are watching this video, you're hopefully writing a novel to eventually publish it. So I highly recommend using ClickUp when it comes to actually publishing it. You can create to-do lists in there, and you can assign due dates to yourself. You can view it as a Kanban board, a digital Gantt chart. You can also keep track of different documents in there as well. So if you're looking for a fun way to track all your goals and progress, make sure to check out ClickUp. Thank you again to them for sponsoring this video. So for the sake of today's video and little workshop that we're going to be doing together, I'm going to assume that you've already gone through the brainstorming phase of writing a new book. So I'm going to assume that you've spent a lot of time with an open notebook or a blank document and just jotting down a bunch of ideas. And now that you have all those ideas, we're going to create those ideas and make it into an actual book outline using the Save the Cat method. And if you aren't familiar with Save the Cat, then make sure to read Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I will leave it linked down below. It's an incredibly helpful book. All the information I talk about today is taken from that book, but we are doing the incredibly summarized SparkNote edition of that. So like I said, I'm assuming you already did your brainstorming. I've already done my brainstorming. I did all my brainstorming using my novel outline planner. I just used some of the blank notebook pages. You guys can use whatever you'd like. If you don't already have my novel outline planner, it's a planner with like worksheets and templates that help you brainstorm your book or even outline your book, create character profiles, blah, blah, blah. It's available on Amazon if you want to purchase it. Let's talk about how this is gonna work, because this video is different from how things normally go. The goal of this is that you're actually going to outline your book as you watch this video. So however long this ends up being, say this video is a half an hour long. That does not mean we're going to outline our book in half an hour. What it does mean is after I finish talking about each story beat, I want you to pause the video and write down some notes of what could happen for your book for that story beat. So, for example, if we're talking about the catalyst and you think of what the catalyst should be for your book, I want you to stop, write down the word catalyst in your notebook, and then write down a couple of bullet points of what the catalyst is going to be for your book. Or, even better, go ahead and download my free worksheet. It is made into a Google Doc that you guys can download and save to your own Google Drive, and you can fill out your different story beats as we talk about. I already have all the story beats outlined in that little worksheet, so all you have to do is fill out with your little bullet points for your story. If you're someone who prefers writing on paper, you can of course also just use a blank notebook or some of the notebook pages in my novel outline planner if you want to keep it all in one place. And again, I want to reiterate, the goal here is to write down simple, short bullet points of ideas, not like verbatim what the scene is going to be. Just simple notes. So without further ado, let's start talking about story beats. Before we talk about the plot, we have to talk about a few other things. So first things up, let's talk about our main character. Our main character is going to have three things. They have a problem that needs to be solved, a want, and a need. The main character's problem is a flaw that needs fixing. Our main characters cannot be perfect. We gotta give them flaws. We gotta give them personality. We gotta make them different and not something flat and boring. Our main characters also need to have a want. This is what the main character is going to be shooting for, the goal that they are striving for. However, they have a want, but they also have a need. And the need is the moral of the story, the thing that the main character should actually be trying to achieve. And they start off Act 1 of the book shooting for their want, and by Act 3 of the book, the main character realizes they need to shoot for their need. See what I'm saying here? Now, let's move on to the basic plot. The basic plot has two elements, the A story and the B story. The A story is the external story. These are the different things that are happening to your main character. So let's talk about the Hunger Games for an example. The thing happening to the main character is that Katniss Everdeen is in the Hunger Games. That is the A story. Now let's talk about the B story. The B story is the internal story. Oftentimes, these are the things the character needs to learn, and it's also the internal battle. So for Katniss in the Hunger Games, we've got the B story of the love story, but also the government and the need for change in order for the Hunger Games not to continue happening. So again, A story, external conflict, B story, internal conflict. Those are the things you need to figure out before we start doing the actual story beats, which is right now. So first up, let's talk about Act 1 of our story. And the first story beat we start with is the opening image. This is just where we get a feel for the book's tone, mood, and the writing style. It allows the reader to see if it's something that they're gonna jive with, and also gives us a taste of what's gonna happen. But most of all, we need to look at what life is like for our main character before things happen. Now, oftentimes, new writers want to start off the beginning of their book with a good hook, and you definitely should start with a good hook, but a lot of beginning writers start off with their catalyst at the very beginning of the book, and you don't want to do that because in order to show really how effective change is over the course of Act 1 to Act 3, you need to show what life is like before the catalyst happens while still establishing a good hook. Now, you can still establish a good hook of giving this before picture by really making your writing style stand strong and let readers get a feel for your tone. Then once the catalyst happens, we're able to completely throw things upside down and show a backwards world of what our main character is familiar with in Act 1. But again, that doesn't happen till Act 2, so let's hold on that for a little bit. The next story beat we have is theme stated. So in your theme stated, you want to allude to what's going to happen. Oftentimes, the way this is done is that the side character makes a comment to the main character to allude to what lesson they're going to learn by the end of the book. And oftentimes, the main character hears this and just ignores the advice, writes it off. You get what I mean. The important thing here is that the main character learns or kind of gets the seed planted of what they're going to learn, but outright ignores the advice or the idea. But at the same time, we want to be subtle about this. We don't want to be blatant in your face. Readers are smart. We don't need to spell things out for them. Next up, we have the setup. This is where you want to give a better feel for what the world of Act 1 is like. So you want to show what your main character's daily life is when they're at home, when they're working, and when they're at play. Now, this can mean many different things. At home is just what's their home life like. At work, whether that be an actual job or maybe school. And at play just means showing the character doing something that they enjoy. So obviously this is going to be multiple scenes, and while you want to show regular daily life for your main character, you still want to throw in a little conflict, show how their life is difficult, give a little nudge to why things are going to need to change and why our main character is unhappy, because we do not want these beginning scenes to be boring. So the goal here is to show our main character's flaws and make it so by the end of the book, Their flaws are gonna have to be fixed. Their flaws are something that cannot be ignored. So let's move on to the most exciting part, in my opinion. This is usually the scene that sparks the idea for a book story, or at least that's how it works for me. But that is the catalyst. This is where things are going to change forever. We need something to happen to the main character where it makes it impossible for the main character to continue as usual. Something happens, whether it's internally, externally, whatever happens, where no matter what the main character tries to do, they cannot resume life as normal. And that catalyst brings us into the next story beat, which is debate. The debate story beat is where the main character is basically in denial. They know they need to change, but they don't want to change. We are all creatures of habit, and at the end of the day, we want our main character to be as human and relatable as possible. And as humans, we don't like change, and we need to show that through the debate story beat. So not only are you going to show the struggle of the main character, wanting to stay the same, but you also need to show them preparing for the change that is to come. So you show them thinking about, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. And then finally show them settling into their new reality and preparing for whatever is about to happen. And that, my friends, is the end of Act 1. And I know I am going fast here, but again, pause the video for as often or as long as you need to so you can fill out your worksheet. And I'm not giving a ton of examples here because if you want to learn more, just read the Save the Cat book. But with that said, let's move on to Act 2. So naturally, the first story beat of Act 2 is called Break Into 2. So the goal of Act 2 is to show how different the world of Act 2 is from the world of Act 1. Whatever was familiar and comfortable for the main character in Act 1, we are going to flip it on its side and make the character deal with the repercussions. So we are going to make our main character as uncomfortable as possible, but we want to make sure that the readers are still rooting for them. So don't make them constantly fail, and don't make them super unlikable. Make the main character relatable so the readers root for them and want them to succeed, but also show our main character struggling to fix things, mainly because they're fixing things in the wrong way. Because remember, they are shooting for what they want rather than what they need. And now we are going to discuss the next story beat, which is B story. Remember how we talked about before A story and B story? This is where we finally get to slip in the B story, which is the internal conflict. Oftentimes, the B story is introduced into the story through a side character. And this side character can be a villain, a friend, a mentor, a new love interest. And the goal of this character is whether they're a good guy or bad guy, they're actually going to help our main character learn their lesson in some way, shape, or form. This new side character has to do two things. They need to, 1, represent the upside down world of Act 2, and 2, they need to help the main character towards their goal. And this is where the fun really starts to begin, which brings us to the properly named Fun and Games story beat. This is the biggest story beat. It's many, many different scenes. It's a good 30% of your novel oftentimes, and it is also known as the promise of premise. And the promise of premise is usually the selling point of the book. So going back to the Hunger Games example, the promise of premise for the Hunger Games was the actual Hunger Games. If you've read the book, you know that a good percentage of the book is all just leading up to the Hunger Games. And then there's a decent chunk that is the actual Hunger Games, and then the book wrapping up and ending. The actual Hunger Games is the promise of premise, aka the fun and games. This is the reason why people were sold on the book originally, and it's the main plot of the book and what people are excited to read about. This is also the hardest point of the book to write because the story beat is so big, 30% of the book, compared to the other story beats that we talk about, which is usually only one or maybe a couple of scenes. This is a lot of scenes, and you want to make sure it doesn't drag and that you don't accidentally create that saggy middle that we hear people talk about all the time, where people get to the middle of the book and things just kind of drag on or get a little boring. So how do you create an engaging, fun and games story beat? You do that by putting your main character through highs and lows. So we're all pretty familiar with the 3-act structure of a book, of how there's, ups and downs where a main character has to go through emotional turmoil. But no one talks about how in Act 2, there's a lot of ups and downs where they have a small victory and then a small defeat, small victory, small defeat, small victory, small defeat. And basically, you want to put your main character through hell. You want to drag them through the dirt, but you don't want them constantly failing, because then readers don't have anything to root for if they feel like victory is really, really far out of reach. So you still need to give them some victories so we continue to feel engaged and motivated. And by the end of the fun and games portion of the book, you should be coming up to the midpoint story beat. The midpoint is kind of like a mini catalyst, in my opinion. It's another point in the book where huge change happens, and this usually happens either by false defeat or false victory. So you have a couple of different options of what you could have happen in your midpoint of your book. Option number 1, again, false defeat or false victory. This is probably the most straightforward. Option 2, you raise the stakes even more. Again, usually their stakes are raised because of the false defeat or false victory. And 3, my personal favorite, the A story and the B story collide, or if we want to translate that, the internal conflict and the external conflict finally collide. But again, they're still in denial. They're starting to realize this, but they don't want to start fighting for what they need. They still want to fight for what they want. And now that the stakes are raised, it is time to move to the next story beat, which is bad guys close in. So things are getting progressively worse for our poor main character. It is time for the internal bad guys to descend. They're going through some sort of inner monologue, an emotional battle, and we're just on a downward spiral. But things will get worse, because that's where the all is lost beat comes in. The bad guys close in was just kind of like the opening act. And then when we have the all is lost beat, it's like it's the actual show, because it's time for the hero to lose, to fail, whatever you want to call it. Not only do we want our main character to fail, we want the failure to be 100% their fault, and they're going to have to deal with the guilt of that. Which brings us to, yes, it does get worse, the story beat titled Dark Night of the Soul. Because now that our main character has officially failed at their mission, it's time to deal with their defeat. And while they do have to deal with their defeat, usually dealing with the consequences of their own actions forces them to finally have an epiphany. But sometimes the only way this epiphany happens is if they go backwards. And by backwards, I mean they try to go back to the Act 1 world they're familiar with. They try to undo things, and they try to embrace their old life again and just ignore everything that happened in the Act 2 world. But when they go back to their Act 1 world, they realize it's impossible, that they've changed too much, or that Act 1 world is gone forever. Or maybe when they do go back to their Act 1 world, and even though it is all the same, they don't recognize it anymore and it doesn't feel like home. That's when they realize they're the ones that need to continue to change. And now that things are getting more and more exciting, we are brought to Act 3. And again, properly named, the first story beat in the Act 3 world is Break into 3. It's time for our main character to restart, to try to fix things again. But this time, they're going to fix things correctly. They're not going to be fixing things because that's what they want. They're going to be fixing things because that's what they need. And again, this is why I wanted you guys to identify your main character's wants and needs before we started plotting the book, because now we have the shift, the official shift and reconciliation of no longer fighting for what we want and fighting for what we need. Which brings us to the finale. Now, the Save the Cat method uses a different method for a 5-point finale. Not all books have a 5-point finale. Not all books necessarily need a 5-point finale. And in my opinion, it doesn't always fit for all genres. But I want you to try to create a 5-point finale for your book because it really does create a page-turning book and it makes people want to continue reading to figure out what's going on. Because again, we are going to put our main character through hell and back. So let's review the 5-point finale. So part 1, gathering the team. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is where we're gathering forces. We're getting ready to go into battle. But of course, it could be a metaphorical battle. It doesn't have to be a literal battle. Or in some other genres, instead of gathering forces, you're just trying to make amends. Maybe you burned bridges over the course of Act 2. It's time to mend those bridges, and that's what this story beat is for. And then we move on to number 2, executing the plan. So we've mended our bridges, we've gathered our allies. Now we're gonna execute a plan. And the plan should feel impossible. And as they're executing the plan, the main character is starting to realize, oh no, even though I have these people helping me, I have to do this alone. I have to go at this alone. Because that's what's going to make it the most impactful. When the main character realizes, even with all the help in the world, at the end of the day, it all falls on their shoulders. And that brings us to point number 3, HighTower surprise. Because we are going to make our main character fail one more time, because why not? There was some sort of flaw in the plan or some sort of plot twist, and another failure will happen. Because let's face it, we gotta throw another curveball at our main character. And due to said failure, we move on to point 4, which is dig down deep. This is when the main character realizes what needs to happen in order to succeed, and the thing that needed to happen oftentimes was in them all along. I know, very sappy, but effective. The thing that they realize is often the theme of the story, or a flaw that they finally overcome, or even proof that they have changed. And I know it all sounds sappy and annoying when I talk about it, but trust me, it's effective when in action. So this is when it's time for our main character to take a leap of faith, which brings us to the final point in our 5-point finale, which is execution of the new plan. And basically, this is when we finally let our main character win. After everything we've put them through, it's time for them to finally have a victory. Like I said, sometimes it's hard to pull off that 5-point finale depending on what genre your book is, but you can get creative for it. I've definitely been able to do this sort of 5-point finale for like one of the romance books I wrote, and I feel like it was very effective. And it's not as like dramatic as, you know, fighting a battle in a fantasy world, but you can still pull it off. The stakes are just different. So instead of fighting an epic battle, maybe our main character is just confessing their feelings to their crush. So let's wrap up our book with our final story beat, which is the final image. This is where we wrap everything up and we give the readers an opportunity to read the last bit of our story and say, wow, because that's what we want to happen. We don't want to end a book as soon as victory is claimed. We want to wrap things up with a nice little bow, and we want our characters to settle in, and we want our characters to also celebrate their victory, and you want the readers to celebrate the victory as well. So when it is done, they're like, oh my god, that was an epic book. This is also your chance to let your readers say goodbye to your characters. The characters that they love so much and have adored and have been rooting for and struggling with. This is their point to really embrace it all and say goodbye to your book, or see you later if the book has a sequel. So, like I said, that was an extremely fast way of summing up Save the Cat story beats. If you're not familiar with the story beats, I highly recommend reading Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I know not everyone enjoys following like plot structures like this, but I truly believe that these plot structures are what makes a story do really well with readers and makes readers really obsessed with your book. Lastly, I also just want to say make sure to check out the Save the Cat Writes a Novel book, because towards the beginning of the book, there's something called the transformation test. And it's a bunch of questions you ask yourself to make sure that your book is following each of the story beats and hitting all the points. So after you outline, like you did with this video, hopefully, check out the transformation test and make sure that you hit all the points, and then you'll have, an epic book to write. And if you want to learn even more on writing a novel, if you want an extensive course on novel writing, make sure to check out the course How to Write a Novel by Reedsy. I highly recommend it. It's basically like a college course on novel writing, and it's a guided course as well. So I will leave that linked down below if you want to check it out. Otherwise, that is it for this video.